In this video, we're going to create our notes table as well as the different files behind the functionalities of our notes management system. So let's start with the notes table. So if you go to your application database, okay, and then create a table there. So let's choose a name for our table. I'm going to call it notes, and it's going to have 4 columns. All right, so the first column is going to be the ID of the notes. So it's going to be an integer, and let's go for a length of 4 characters. Okay, and we're gonna check the auto increment box. Now the next one is going to be the user ID. So this corresponds to the ID of the user who created the note. And again, we're going to go for an integer of 4 characters maximum. Then we're going to have the content of our note. We can call it note. Okay, so there's going to be some text, and we don't have to specify any length. And finally, we're going to have the time column. So this corresponds to when the note was created. Okay, and it's formatted as a Unix timestamp. So it's going to be an integer, and we're going to go for a maximum length of 10 characters. So let's save. Okay. So our table is now created. Now let's go to our FTP and create the different files we need to manage our notes. So the first file is going to be the JavaScript file where we're going to write all the AJAX calls. Okay. So let's create a file and call it, for example, mynotes.js. Okay, so inside this file, we'll place all the AJAX calls. Okay, and also the functionalities of the different buttons in our notes page. All right, the next file we're going to create is a PHP file, which we'll use to load the notes. Okay. So let's call it load notes.php. Also, we're going to have a file called create notes, which we'll use to create a new note. And then we're going to have another one, update notes. So this file is going to be used when writing in the text area. Okay, so again, any character we write there is going to be triggering an AJAX call, okay, to this file to update the notes in question. And finally, we're going to have a file delete note. So this file is going to delete a specific note. Okay. Now let's open all these files in brackets and go through their structure. So here we can see the different files we created, as well as our notes page and the connection file, which we'll need to include in different files later on. So let's start by linking our notes page to the JavaScript file where we're going to write the different AJAX calls. Okay, so we're going to go to our notes page and go to the bottom of the page and add a script. Okay. Okay, with a source going to our JavaScript file, which is mynotes.js. Okay, so now we linked the notes page to the JavaScript file where we're going to write our AJAX calls. All right, now let's go through the structure of our JavaScript file. So first of all, we're going to be writing some jQuery code inside this file. So to make sure that the code is executed once the page is fully loaded, we're going to use the jQuery load function. So we're going to write all the code inside this function. Okay. So if you remember, this is the syntax of the function. Okay. So inside the function, First of all, we're going to define a couple of variables. So we're going to use these variables for a couple of things. So if you remember, when we want to update a certain node, we'll need to send the ID of the node through the AJAX call. And we said earlier that we need to store that ID in a certain variable. So that's the first use of variables. The second use is going to be when we click on the edit button, we're going to want to go to the edit mode. Okay, so that's the edit mode. Okay, so and that's going to correspond to another variable. All right, so next we're going to write some code to load nodes, okay, on page load. So to load nodes, we're going to send an AJAX call to our load nodes file. Okay. Then we're going to write some code for creating a new node. So once you click on that button, you're going to create a new node. Okay. So that's going to be add a new node. And that's going to be an AJAX call to another file, which is create nodes.php. And next, we're going also to write some JavaScript code for typing inside the text area. Okay, so that's for typing a note. And this time the AJAX call is going to go to the file update nodes. Okay, and we're going to have a few other things like clicking on all nodes button. Okay, so all this is going to be doing is loading the nodes again, like that. Also, once you have edited the nodes by deleting the ones you don't want, if you click on the done button, okay, you want to do something else. Okay, well, basically you're gonna also be loading the nodes again. And you'll be using some previous code you created. And also, if you click on edit, you'll need to do a couple of things as well. So basically you're going to go to the edit mode. Okay, and you're going to show these buttons. And also you're going to reduce the width of the nodes and so on. Okay. Also, we're going to write some functions. So these functions are going to take care of certain things like when you click on a node, okay, you want to show the text area. Also, when you click on the delete button, we're going to use a function for that. So the reason why we're going to use functions for this is because you really need to refresh the functionality of clicking on a node or clicking on a delete button. And that's because, again, if you create a new node, okay, and then you reload the nodes, there will be a new HTML component in there. And the functionality of clicking on the node or on the delete button, which is hidden inside that new node, is not there yet. It's going to be there for all the old nodes, but not for the new one. So we're going to write the code of clicking on a node and clicking on the delete button inside a function so that we can run the function again whenever we create a new node. Okay, and we reload the nodes. So this is going to make more sense in a bit. So we're going to have functions. So the first one is for clicking on a node, and the other one is for clicking on the delete button. And finally, we're going to have a function which will help us hide and show certain elements, okay? And this function is going to be the show hide function. Okay, so that's it for our JavaScript file, all right? So now let's move to the PHP files. So we're going to start with the load nodes file. All right, so first of all, we are going to start a session because we're going to need some session variables, okay, in this code. So it's going to be session start as usual. And then we're going to connect to the database by including our connection file as we did before. And then the first thing we're going to do here is get the user ID, okay, because we're going to need the user ID to get all the nodes corresponding to that specific user. Okay. So first of all, get the user ID. So you're going to get the user ID using the session variables. Okay. So when the user is logged in, we store the user ID in the session array. All right. And then we're going to delete any nodes which have no content. Okay. So we're going to go through all the nodes, and if you find one without content, we will delete it. So we're going to run a query for this to delete empty nodes. And once we've done that, we're going to look for all nodes corresponding to our user ID. Okay, so we're going to run another query to look for nodes corresponding to our user ID. And once we find those, then we're going to show them on our notes page. If we don't find any, we just show an alert message saying something like, you have not created any notes yet. Okay, so show notes or alert message. We'll also make sure that if there are any errors in the queries, we'll show an error message. Okay, so that's it for our load nodes file. Now let's move to the next one. So first of all, we're going to start a session as we did in the previous one, and then connect to the database. And then after that, we are gonna get the user ID. Okay, because we need to know which user has created the nodes, and also we're going to get the time or the current time. Okay, and I'm going to do this using the time function. And then after that, we're going to run a query which will create our new nodes. All right. If anything goes wrong, we're just going to return an error to the Ajax call. Okay. All right. Now let's move to the next one. So again, we're going to start with starting a session and then connecting to the database. Then to update the node, first of all, we need to know the ID of the nodes. And basically, this is going to be sent through the Ajax call. Okay, so we're going to get the ID of the nodes using the Ajax call, or sent through the Ajax call. So now we've got the ID. Now we need to know the content or the new content of the nodes. That's also going to be sent through Ajax. And finally, we need to know the time, okay, when the node was updated. So get the time as well. So using all these elements, we're gonna run a query to update the nodes. Okay. Okay, so now let's move to the next one, deleting a node. So again, we're gonna start with session start and connecting to the database. Okay. So to delete a node, we need to know the ID of the node. So get the ID of the node through Ajax. Okay. And once we get the ID of the nodes, we are gonna run a query to delete the nodes from the nodes table. Okay. And again, if anything goes wrong, we're gonna return an error to the Ajax call. Alright, so in the next video, we're going to start translating all these steps into JavaScript and PHP code and build all functionalities of our nodes management system.